All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. On an action-packed week here, we're very happy to be joined for the first time on This Week in Missouri Politics by Jay Ashcroft. He's a candidate for Secretary of State here in Missouri on the Republican side. I think no one will be surprised to see. Mr. Ashcroft, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I want to start off with what's in the news this week. You announced an initiative petition drive where you're going to try to take the opportunity to have voter ID passed and put it on the ballot to be voted on in the Constitution. So kind of walk us through what your petition does and why you're doing it.
Okay. Well, let me give you a little bit of a background.
Sure.
In, I think it was 2006, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that the Missouri Constitution did not allow for there to be a photo voter ID requirement in Missouri. The United States Supreme Court has said that under the United States Constitution it's allowed, but the Missouri Supreme Court has said you can't do it in Missouri because of our Constitution. Since then, the legislature has tried to implement a photo voter ID requirement, and actually the last 3 years the Missouri House has passed the legislation that would be required to do that, but it hasn't made it through the Senate. And I just look at it as a common sense way to help protect the vote, to make sure that people are not disenfranchised by illegal votes. And it's a simple way to just move forward on the issue to protect people's votes, and someone needed to do it, and I said, I'm willing to do it.
Okay, walk me through this. Do you have to have a photo ID to get on a plane?
Yeah.
Do you have to have a photo ID to open a bank account?
Yeah.
Do you have a photo ID to do almost anything in natural commerce? Even the government requires a photo ID, right, in many instances?
Yeah, at times going into courthouses, a lot of businesses, when I worked in the defense industry as an engineer, we had a photo ID requirement at the facility because of the nature of what we were doing for the Air Force.
But not to vote?
No, you're not required to have one to vote here.
Is it your feeling that in a modern society, even in Missouri, wherever you happen to hail from, you can get a photo ID if you want one?
Well, yeah, but I also think that we need to make sure that it is possible and it is easy and that there's not any sort of great hurdles or problems for people to get one. And when the legislature was looking at that last year, Representative Dogan did a great job at looking at how we can make sure people are provided photo IDs either at no cost and minimal effort.
Well, a big week for the representative. We're having him on the panel here in our next segment. But walk me through why, right now, can a Missourian go to a government office and get a free photo ID? Is that possible today in Missouri? If
you go to like the Department of one of the fee offices to get a driver's license or something like a driver's license or non-driver's license, they're gonna charge you for that.
What does it cost? So $5, $10? Nominal fee, right?
My driver's license, I believe, is coming up this year, but so it's been several years. But yeah, it's
you gotta
a
take
somewhat
the test,
nominal
or
fee.
you...
No, it hasn't expired. It will expire, and then there's a grace period.
I'm not sure I could pass the test without some effort.
I would not want to have
my
to
driving record
park.
would indicate that I almost definitely could not pass the test without some effort. Why does the government not just give you I mean, is it honestly, would it be too much to ask at the millions of fluorescent lighted cubicle warehouses full of bureaucrats, I'm sure to make business owners' lives better? Actually, not at all, to make it much worse, I'm sure. Couldn't you get rid of the last two cubicles and just give everybody in the state access to a free photo ID?
I think there are definitely ways that we can pursue to make it so that people can get an ID without problem.
And wouldn't that be the fair thing, to give them if the government's going to require it, give it to you for free?
I think we ought to make it so it's, I don't know that, is it wrong for me to have to pay for it? No. I mean, I can afford it. I don't have a problem with that, but we definitely need to make it so that anyone can get it.
If voting's a right, and the government is going to require you to have a photo ID to do many interactions with the government, it seems to be a basic thing they could give to you.
I think it's a good thing to do.
I mean,
yeah, I think it's a good thing to do.
I mean, to me, the government can build roads, hopefully assist the St. Louis Cardinals.
Sometimes they build roads.
Sometimes build roads, hopefully assist the Cardinals and give you an ID. So is that the petition right there?
Yes. Now, it has not been fully approved as part of the process. You file an initiative petition with the Secretary of State's office. They'll look at it for whether or not it's correctly done. They'll send it off to the Attorney General. They have to create the ballot language for it, the official ballot title, I should say. And then they need to have it sent off to see exactly what the cost would be to the government if the amendment is passed. So right now we're not allowed to canvass and collect signatures. We'll start doing that in the July timeframe because we need to allow time for it to move through the official process to do that.
Okay, so this is going to be something that you'll have available. Will you be giving this out as part of your campaign to get signed? How many signatures do you need?
Well, what you need, according to the Constitution, you need 8%. You need a number of signatures equal to 8% of the people that voted in the last gubernatorial election from 6 of the 8 congressional districts. So depending on which congressional district, it changes how many votes you need because the number of voters in each district is different. Roughly, we'll need 200,000 votes. You don't actually need 200,000 actual votes, but you're going to get some votes that are thrown out because signatures don't match or people signed for the wrong county. Really, you need about 160,000 actual votes, but you need to shoot for about 200,000 to make sure you have enough.
Excellent. So break this down. You're an attorney.
Yes, sir.
Living in St. Louis. Got some roots in Cole County. Obviously, we know about the Ashcroft roots in southwest Missouri. Why do you want to be Secretary of State?
Well, if I could just jump back, I prefer to say that I'm an engineer that's licensed to practice the law.
Fair enough.
I'm an engineer and an attorney. I want to be Secretary of State because I think that far too long in Missouri, we've had a real dearth of leadership. We haven't had people that were willing to stand up and act in their official capacity to make sure that they ensure the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that this country was founded on. The Secretary of State's office is frequently overlooked by individuals. I don't think they understand how important it is. They don't understand that the Secretary of State is the chief election authority for the state. Now, that doesn't mean that the Secretary of State runs elections. Your local election authorities, your LEAs, your county clerks, your election boards do that. But it's very important to have an individual that will lead on making sure that every legal voter has the right to vote and has the ability to vote, and it's not too difficult. And also that their votes are not canceled out by people voting illegally, that people that go to the polls know what they're voting on because the ballot language actually tells you what that amendment or that law that they're voting on would do. We need to make sure that we have a Secretary of State that works with businesses to create a good environment for jobs so that people can get good jobs and live their lives the way they want to. And frankly, the Secretary of State's office as the repository, if you will, of all state regulations, the Secretary of State's office publishes those, puts those out when it's the right time, should take a lead role in going through those regulations and suggesting to the legislature and other parts of the government, hey, do we really need to be regulating buggy whips anymore? How can we release the red tape and allow people to live their lives the way they want to so we can be successful again?
I would say that's one thing the current Secretary of State, Jason Kaner, seems to be making an effort to. I've used his office a few times. It's actually pretty user-friendly. Got a very good website on the business side. I mean, he seems to be doing some things to be a little proactive in that regard and have done a good job. Let me walk back to the campaign. I mean, you talked about the Secretary of State's office being important. There's only been one Republican governor since I was in grade school, and that was Matt Blunt, who was a Secretary of State. The Republican U.S. Senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt, his father, is a former Secretary of State. This is this is one of the jobs you take and sometimes get moved up. So let me walk through the issues that may be leaving the purview of the Secretary of State's office just a little bit, but talk about what Republican primary voters might care about. You're running against Senator Krause from Kansas City.
Right.
There's no Democrat yet. There's a couple hard-charging young reps, Representative Favor, Representative Carpenter maybe, are being recorded.
And there's a Roy Chin out of the city of St. Louis that's running.
Okay. Walk me through your position on abortion. Republican primary voters care about that. That's something they vote on.
I believe that life is sacred. And that's before you're born, that's when you're elderly, that's at all times. I think that's a gift from God and it should be protected. I think that the very basic purpose of government is to protect the citizens' ability to live their lives the way they want to as long as they're not hurting someone else. And if you don't have life, how can you enjoy any other freedom?
Let me walk through the issue of the Second Amendment. That's a big issue to Missouri Republican primary voters. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment?
Well, I think the Second Amendment is clear. The United States Constitution protects the right of individuals to keep and bear arms. I mean, the language is very clear.
So the last issue of taxes. Do you know any Missourian that gets his pay stub on Friday, wipes his brow, looks at it and says, by God, I just didn't send Jeff City enough money for the wonderful things they do for me?
You know, there appear to be a lot of people on the Democrat side that say that taxes are low or too low, but they never seem to send in extra money of their own when they have to.
Notice that.
Obviously, some level of fees or taxation is required so that we can have a government, so that we can have a police force, so that we can have firemen and those sorts of things. So we can have roads. I mean, there are a lot of things that we need government to do. But I think that one of the roles of government is always to be trying to find the least intrusive way to do those things that it has to do. And one way to be to be the least intrusive is to have as low a tax burden on people as you can.
You know, a couple things. There was a discussion this year in the legislature about highways. One thing that the government does do for business is provide an infrastructure of highways. As Secretary of State, will you be part of the process of trying to help the business community by finding a way to build an adequate infrastructure for the state?
Well, yeah, I think as the Secretary of State, really as any government official, you should always be trying to work with all of your constituencies. And the main constituency is the voters. But you also have to, you want to make sure that you have a good business environment so that they have job opportunities. You want to work with, in every area so that you can make the state better for people.
It seems to be one thing that Missouri, it just costs X to provide this infrastructure system, and maybe it just we're not paying what it costs to maintain and upgrade this. I mean, it seems to me of the things the government does, that's something where somebody's going to have to come up with some idea to fund this. Lastly, there may be an issue on the ballot alongside you next year, a big tax on cigarettes. I know some of the highest paid state officials are making it a very good point to travel the state. I know the head of Mizzou has been barnstorming the state to try to raise more money. What is your position on a tax increase?
Well, I think that anytime anybody wants a tax increase, they have to prove that it's necessary, that it's the right level, and that it's applied to the right things. As I said, we need some amount of taxes and fees to support the government, but my initial impression of any tax increase is no. Now prove to me that I'm wrong on that.
It's become a little odd when you have Tim Wolf making more than the President of the United States.
Yeah.
It seems to be you have a big job to do, and that job might not just include barnstorming for more money. It seems to be how much more could you possibly make?
Well, he's done a good job keeping a good football coach there, so let me give him credit for that.
I think we can all agree on that. Jay Ashcroft, I hope you'll be back as the campaign goes on, and thank you for joining us this morning on This Week in Missouri Politics.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
And we'll be right back with our Opinion Maker panel.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. We're now joined by our Opinion Maker panel. This week we are joined by Blake Lawrence, the legal counsel for Senator Jamilah Nasheed here in St. Louis. And formerly, what will be important for today's discussion, you practice with the Ketcher Law Firm, right? Brad Ketcher. Right. Yep. Everyone on Twitter will be a big fan of his, election law guru. Representative Shamed Dogan, big week for you. The Mizanski thing, we're talking about voter ID. We're very glad to have you on the panel today. And Schweitzer, public eye extraordinaire, now veteran here on This Week in Missouri Politics. Very glad to have you back.
Thanks.
And Representative Robert Cornejo, St. Charles County chairman in the House. And we'll start with you. What did you think of Jay Ashcroft's interview?
I don't think anybody can question Jay's credentials and the principles that he grew up on. And then talking about the initiative petition, I think that's a thing of beauty. One of the things that floors
good politics, right? I mean, it's
well, yeah. You know, I think I've never seen a poll that, you know, voter ID polls less than 70% on. And one of the things, you know, you listed off kind of a laundry list of everything that you need a photo ID on. One of the things I find interesting is analogy is bankruptcy. You know, bankruptcy is more of a constitutional right than voting. It's in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. You need a photo ID in order to file for bankruptcy, and by definition, if you're bankrupt, you don't have any money, and yet you're required to have a photo ID in order to file for bankruptcy, but not for voting. It doesn't make sense.
Shouldn't the IDs be free? Couldn't you find some way to cut 2 bureaucrats out of the state bureaucracy and pay for people that need an ID?
Yeah, you know, I think that's something that should definitely be looked at. It's something that the House moved towards this year that we passed out, was providing help with the documentation, the supporting documentation in order to get the photo ID, and I think it's something that we should definitely look at further.
Blake Lawrence, the legal counsel to the leader in the fight against photo ID. When we had you on, I was very thrilled because I want to hear the other side. What's the other side to Jay Ashcroft's petition?
Sure. Well, I think voter ID is really a solution without a problem in this state. A 2014 Washington Post study that was published by a professor from the University of Loyola Chicago Law School found that of about 1 billion votes cast in the United States, local, state, federal elections between 2000 and 2012, only about 31 instances, 31 allegations of voter fraud were found in over 1 billion votes cast. So I know that we're talking about, you know, increasing confidence in the system, but is this really a problem that we need to be addressing by a law that could potentially disenfranchise up to 200,000 Missouri voters?
Is that a real number?
That is a real number. It comes from Secretary of State Kander's report that he issued in 2011, I believe.
So, and you need a photo ID to do all sorts of government interactions. What would be the problem with having a photo ID to vote? I think there's a lot of our viewers that see it as a political issue, not so much a practical issue.
Well, there's a lot of issues to having to have a photo ID to vote. A lot of people can't get a photo ID, whether it's because they don't have a birth certificate they can find, they're older, they're younger, they're poor, there's a lot of different things. College students, there's a lot of people who just don't have photo IDs. And one of the questions I would ask is he requiring a photo ID to sign his petition? Because that would be something that I would be very interested in having an answer to.
You're here, always immaculately have everything together. Do you have a photo ID in your purse right now?
Oh, of course, yeah.
So do I. It seems to me like the government should provide it for you. But is it, and help me out here, because I don't see the argument for, is it hard in modern day Missouri to get a photo ID?
For some people, it's hard.
And that you have to have a birth certificate? Is that the thing? Some people don't have birth certificates?
I mean, there's a lot of different things. You could probably tell more exactly where you need to get a photo ID, but it is prohibitive. It's difficult. I mean, a lot of people have a hard time even getting to government buildings, but they can get to where their polling place is. But if
I see Blake's point. Is this more of a political issue than it is just a pragmatic issue of, I mean, it seems like it follows in some logic. You used to have an ID to vote. Is this more politics or actual disenfranchisement? 200,000 people sounds like a big number that wouldn't have a photo ID that actually wanted to get one.
Well, let me just jump in here and say, first of all, if my boss, Senator Nasheed, was here, I think she'd be encouraged by the discussion that you were having a moment ago and with Jay Ashcroft when you were talking about, okay, why don't we just pay for everyone to have a voter ID? Let's take that a step further. Why don't we just, in our election notices that we mail to everyone, why don't we just put an enforceable ID, photo or not, in with that mailing? That's something that Senator Nasheed has talked about before. She's reached out to Senator Krause. She's reached out to Senator Schaaf. They've had that discussion. I don't want to speak for them, of course, but I can speak to some degree for Senator Nasheed in that she's interested in those kind of discussions. Oh. And everyone here knows, I think,
common sense.
Yes, that she is willing to speak with people on both sides of the aisle. She really believes that we have to agree to disagree without being disagreeable.
Well, this would be law today if she hadn't took up the charge on this, right? I mean, I think she's the one that's been the vanguard.
I would agree with that.
Let's bring in Representative Dogan. You tackled some of these issues in the House in your first year. I mean, you took on some weighty issues. This maybe being the biggest one you had an impact on. You moved the debate. Tell us what happened in the House this year on the ID issue.
Well, the bill we passed included an amendment that I sponsored, which does actually provide for those birth certificates that Democrats have used as one of the main objections to not supporting voter ID. And the fact that we in the state of Missouri would have been the first state to provide that type of protection in a voter ID law is very generous. It's something that doesn't disenfranchise anybody. What we're actually doing is helping people who are poor, who are elderly, move into modern society by getting them these IDs. You don't very often see a lot of Republicans wanting to spend money on a program to get people free stuff. But that's exactly what we did when you look at it. Democrats supported my amendment, but for some reason weren't able to turn around and then support voter ID.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, if the government's going to require you to have this to interact with the government, and you don't get a choice of interacting with the government, they'll come find you. This seems like a pretty common sense thing to provide folks with a free picture ID. It doesn't seem that cost burdensome. If you look at all the stuff the government does, surely there could be something cut and provide that service. It seems to make a lot of sense, and it would, and people that actually are using it not just for politics, but to practically, like Senator Nasheed, that might be the way to get this done. Does it get done next year if you just give people a photo ID?
I would hope so. I would hope the Democrats would kind of look at the political wins on this issue. They, in a lot of cases, are not representing where their constituents are. The vast majority of Missourians support photo ID. The vast majority of Americans support it. If you look at the micro polling, the vast majority of African Americans support photo ID requirements. So I think in a lot of cases, no offense to Senator Nasheed or anything, but I think that a lot of the folks in our Black caucus are not necessarily representing where their constituents are on this issue.
Representative Cornejo, if there's a provision to give folks a photo ID provided from the government, I don't give it. I mean, everything that the government gets, they take from somebody. But if they take money from some folks and they give folks a photo ID, does that pass the House?
Absolutely.
And is this a law that progressives could support if you just provide the photo IDs?
Possibly, but I still think there are so many issues getting up to that point
that
we're not quite there yet, and just having to have a photo ID now would be really irresponsible.
Are there pragmatic senators that want to solve real problems like Senator Nasheed that would look at this and that be something that she could maybe not vote for but let come to a vote?
Senator Nasheed, maybe more than any of her colleagues, is someone who's willing to talk with people on the other side of the aisle. That being said, at this moment, I'm pretty sure that she's going to oppose any voter ID measures in its current form. I don't want to exclude things in the future, but, you know, and real quick, I just, you know, Representative Dogan made the point, you know, he said that this is this would be a generous law, that this would be a law that is a free service. Well, it is in the Constitution. It's in the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. It should be a free service. It should be a right. Sure. And I think that that's something that Senator Nasheed is going to continue to emphasize as this debate goes on. But again, she will continue to have that discussion with anybody who's willing to have it.
The most important right, though, is the ability to vote. So if anything stops the ability to vote, that's definitely not as important.
Well, let's talk about there may be people voting on a tax increase next year on cigarettes. What's your take?
I think the cigarette tax is the golden ticket for so many lawmakers in Missouri. Everybody's looking at, we need a lot more money. Where can we get it? Oh, we have the lowest tax rate on cigarettes in the country. This is perfect. We must do this. Missouri voters don't seem to be that into it. I know Kansas is looking at increasing the tax on cigarettes there, and so everybody in Kansas is like, great, I'll just come to Missouri to buy cigarettes. So we'll see how that plays out and how that affects it.
Representative Dogan, a tax increase? How does this hit voters?
I think the vast majority of voters have opposed these types of tax increases in the past. I think it's a dangerous proposition to have government relying on a sin tax to fund necessities, because then you're relying on people to engage in these bad behaviors for revenue purposes.
Can the government afford for people to quit smoking?
Right. You put yourself in a conundrum that I don't think we really want to go into when you start increasing that tax and then wanting to rely on that revenue.
Now, they'll tell you it's for the children. We've heard that on almost every possible thing. In Jefferson City, things are either pro-life, pro-gun, or for the children, and some things are all three, right? You have now the head of the University of Missouri, who makes more than the President of the United States, out stumping for more money. What is the optics of one of the highest paid government taxpayer employees out stumping on government time for a tax, for more money?
That's one of the things that our legislature has been talking about a lot, is the fact of government employees from many different departments lobbying the state government for more funding. And I think that's something that taxpayers, when they hear about that, they don't support that. They don't want their government officials to be double dipping, so to speak, and making a government salary and then asking for more salary from the taxpayers. I think it's offensive.
Representative Cornejo, you're either on the wagon or you're off pushing with everybody else, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
One or the other.
Absolutely. And, you know, and what Representative Dogan was getting at is, you know, there was a bill filed this year, went through one of the committees that I was on to stop having state employees for departments be paid as strictly as lobbyists. That only interaction is with the state legislature. I was able to get through committee. I don't think it ever got to the House for a vote, but I think that's something we should very strongly look at.
Blake Lawrence, I'm just a simple hillbilly from West Butler County. I don't understand all the fancy lawyer stuff that you counsel a senator on. However, the President of the United States can declare war. The President of the United States is the chief executive of the military. He has the nuclear codes. the president of the University of Missouri makes more than him and is out wanting more money. How do you explain that to just a guy turning a wrench today in West Plains?
I'd like to take a little bit of a different angle on this. You know, this year Senator Nasheed passed a bill that would allow Harris-Stowe State University, right here in this district, not too far from this studio, it would allow them for the first time in their history to issue master's degrees. Of the 13 state public universities, 12 of them, since their inception, I think since 1979, had been able to issue those master's degrees. Harris-Stowe hasn't been able to until then. We need to talk about affordable education that's local, that isn't going to cost $1 million.
And maybe it's time to start discussing how there's some of these other universities that actually provide a bigger value.
Absolutely.
And how to spread it around, not just to where some folks in Ivory Tower want it spread, but where maybe actually students would matter. If
Harris-Stowe had, what was it, $450,000 to pay their university president, they would be very excited about that.
They probably have 4 of them, right? Representative Dogan, big week for you. I don't want to butcher this name, but Jeff Mizanski.
That's right.
You've worked very hard on seeing this waste of taxpayer money ended and seeing him freed. Give us the Cliff Note version of it, and you must be very excited this week.
I am. I'm very excited for Jeff, for his family, for the people who've lobbied for him over the years. Jeff is a person who was sentenced to a life without parole sentence for 3 marijuana crimes. 1 of them was possession, 2 of them were sales. He's been in jail for 21 years already with really good behavior. We petitioned the governor, over 2/3 of the Missouri legislature, along with almost 400,000 citizens. And
with you having a leading role.
Yes.
Right?
And
you're on TV, don't be modest.
Last week, he decided to finally do the right thing. I think a lot of that pressure that citizens have been putting on him finally helped. And so now he's going to be eligible for parole in the next couple months. And he's had exemplary behavior. He's not a violent guy at all. So I'm hoping that the Board of Probation and Parole will release him.
Representative Cornejo, Governor Nixon takes heat. He's the governor. Buck stops there, right? Should get a pat on the back when he does something well. I mean, who in the world in the conservative movement wants to spend the amount of money it would cost to incarcerate this man over something as trivial as what he chooses to smoke?
Yeah, and again, kudos to Representative Dogan. What he did was he went around to the legislature, and I believe it was like, what, 128 signatures or something? The 163 state representatives writing a letter to the governor requesting that he be released.
Including Senator Nasheed, by the way.
Yes. And so I think, now that Jay Nixon knew that he had that backup with the legislature that, hey, let this guy out. And again, we're not just opening up the jail doors and saying, get out of here. He still has to go in front of the Board of Parole and prove that he should be let free.
Blake Lawrence, Jay Nixon deserves a pat on the back, doesn't he?
I think he does. I do. I think it's important to understand, though, this isn't so much a marijuana issue as it is a crime issue. I think that both Republicans and Democrats, everybody in between, is coming to the realization that we may have overshot the mark in the 1980s and the 1990s with the war on drugs. So I think this is a step forward for the state of Missouri.
Ann, what's your take on this?
I agree with Blake. There's definitely a lot of people, and this is just the first one that we're really focusing on, but I'm sure there's many more like him who are incarcerated for things they shouldn't be.
Seems like an issue where conservatives are like, why are we paying for this? And liberals are like, why are you making this
like,
illegal? Are starting to meet in the middle is when things start to happen.
Sure, exactly.
Well, we'll leave it there on the harmonious note this week, on This Week in Missouri Politics, and we'll see you right back here next Sunday.